Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscapes with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please leave a rate and review. Today, we will be taking a look at the Arkansas State Red Wolves, who finished 6-7 last season and made an appearance in the Camellia Bowl. They recently wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 20th. We have a special guest joining us today. She does the Workday Redzone at the Ticket Radio. She does pregame and Wolf Howls on 1079 KFIN on game days. She can't say no to some Poncho's cheese dip. She is Kara Richey. Kara can be found at Kara_Richey on X. Welcome to the show, Kara.
Guys, thank you so much for the invite.
We love having you, and we're ready to talk some Red Wolves football. But before we get into it, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you into radio and covering Arkansas State Red Wolves?
Sure. It was a little bit of an interesting career path. About 10, 11 years ago, I wanted to get out of the restaurant business where I'd worked for a while and try something different. And I applied for a radio sales position. The station that I was applying at had just undergone an ownership change, and they were looking to do something a little bit different. They knew I was a big sports fan. They tried to test me out on air. I was not good, but they gave me an opportunity anyways. That station unfortunately sold about 6 months later, but I got a new opportunity with East Arkansas Broadcasters and the Ticket Radio Network. And obviously that's still where I am today. After a few years there, I started doing my own show. Wolf Howls got worked into the mix somewhere in there, which is the A-State football post-game call-in show. And then I started doing network pregame the season before last. So it's been a really fun decade. I guess at this point in time, I can't believe I've been doing this that long, and learned a lot about the way. But since I first got started in radio, Arkansas State has always been a little bit of a part of it. I've been in Jonesboro this whole time. So they're the home team, they're the local team. And it's been a lot of fun to see this team, especially over the past couple of years, that show a little bit of improvement.
Awesome stuff. Let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that is quarterback. Last year, freshman sensation Jalen Rayner broke onto the scene. Can we expect Jalen to kind of continue where he left off there in 2023 and 2024?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm really excited to see what his next step is going to be. I mean, this time last year, he had just wrapped up his first spring as an early enrollee, but he was still basically a high school senior. And already, even going back to spring last year, he had a very good demeanor about him. He had very good poise about him for a really young guy. But at this point in time last year, we kind of thought Jalen Rayner might be third on the depth chart for the entirety of 2023. Well, the other quarterbacks that were in the room with them maybe didn't quite play up to the way that the coaching staff thought. And so a few games into the season, Rayner was given the opportunity and he never relinquished it. What was really interesting right out of the gate is the way he was able to mentally handle the position. He made mistakes, obviously. He's a true freshman. It happens. But we would see him throw an interception, and then on the next drive, he would bounce back and lead the team on a scoring drive. So he was able to shake off those mistakes. He was able to learn from it. He started really, really strong. And then I think about towards the back third of the season, maybe defenses knew what was coming. They were able to scheme for him better. So he had the initial strong start. They made an adjustment. I'm ready to see what adjustment he makes this year in terms of kind of learning from that. I do think that just kind of the intangibles are where we've seen a big step this spring. He's very confident. He's clearly now, even as just going into his sophomore year, a team leader. So I think that's where there's been a big step for him. The physical is there, great deep ball. Of course, dual threat guy, so he can make the plays on the run. During the intro video, we saw his 65-yard touchdown run against Southern Miss. So he's still got the physical skills. The intangibles are growing as well, as is his football IQ. So it's impossible not to be excited about what he can do as a sophomore.
So recently they had a transfer come in from Central Florida, quarterback Timmy McClain. He came in after spring ball, so obviously he wasn't there for spring ball. It just kind of seems like an interesting move. What can you tell us about that?
I joked around that it's good that there's somebody in that room now old enough to buy a beer, which again, and that's not a knock on Jalen Rayner and freshman Josh Flowers, but you can't do it with one or two. I mean, you just can't. That's so risky. No, even in a perfect season, a helmet comes off, an ankle gets rolled. So you want to make sure that if you have to bring somebody in off the bench, that you're not going to burn Josh Flowers' red shirt, if that's what they're going to try and do there. And they're trying to find other ways to use Malik Hornsby. So even though he could come in that role, you don't necessarily want to do that unless you have to. So you needed the experience, you needed the depth. And then also you need somebody to push Rayner. I do feel like he's the guy. I do feel like this is his job at this point in time, but you need competition in every room. I mean, iron sharpens iron is a very overused phrase, but you need competition there. So I think all in all, this was a good move. I still think Rayner's the guy, but I really like the addition of Timmy McClain.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, in addition to the competition, I think it's a positive for Rayner and the coaching staff, because I can see where if they didn't have a lot of depth behind him, they might be asking him to rein in the running a little bit. And so now you got a capable backup, and so they can kind of let him loose, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. You're not quite as nervous about, if Rayner goes down, do you have to give the reins to a true freshman and Josh Flowers? You've got somebody capable, and all of these guys have a similar skill set. They're not carbon copies of each other, but they are all three dual threat guys that are in that room. So there are going to be tweaks to the game plan, assuming if there's a different guy that has to go out there, but ultimately you've got guys that can kind of do the same thing. So that helps out in terms of the quarterback position as well.
You've mentioned true freshman early enrollee Josh Flowers a few times. For those not familiar with him, what can you share about him?
Well, he was a one-time Mississippi State commit, and they went through a coaching change, and all of a sudden he became, a free agent. Arkansas State offensive coordinator Keith Heckendorf, I think, might have been the first person to get down there and talk with him. And so obviously made a good impression. Flowers committed. He's one of the highest rated recruits and signees in program history. Just a ton of talent. Unfortunately, didn't get to learn as much about Flowers this spring as I would have liked, because he was a little bit hampered for spring ball. And I mentioned this to you guys earlier, kind of jokingly. I'm going to be a broken record when we talk about spring and injuries. There's a lot of situations or position groups maybe that I didn't learn as much about as I would have liked, because there were a lot of guys hampered. Flowers was in action for, the first week of spring ball. And I think Butch Jones said something along the lines of drinking from a fire hose. He's trying to get acclimated to college when he's still technically a high school senior. He's trying to get acclimated to college athletics. He's trying to get acclimated to college and Division I football. So life comes at you fast, I'm sure, in that position. And then shortly after the beginning of spring, he had a tweaked hammy. So he missed a few weeks. And while he was still going through mental reps and things like that, he wasn't able to take part in the drills. He did no live work until probably the final week and a half of spring camp. Flowers did finish strong. He had a good spring game. He threw for over 200 yards. He had a touchdown passing. I think he had a touchdown rushing as well. Yeah. So he was able to close out strong. But again, I just wish that it would have worked out so that we could have seen a little bit more of him.
Yeah, you talk about, drinking from a fire hose. Not only is there the sports aspect of it, but then it's where are my classes? Where do I go to eat? How do I get to the training room? There's a lot of other things that, go into it. And, being an early enrollee, I think really helps because then you kind of go on autopilot when it comes football season because you know where those things are. So
yeah, and I don't know how Jalen Rayner would have fared this fall. I don't think he would have been in the position that he was in to ultimately take over QB1 duties if he had not been there in the spring. Because you get used to the college part of it, the training part of it, and then you can focus on the opponents and things like that in the fall.
Well, let's talk about the running game. The Red Wolves bring back their top 4 rushers from 2023 in Jaquez Cross, Zach Wallace, Cedric Hawkins, and the aforementioned Jalen Rayner. How did that room shape up in the spring?
I like this room a lot. We did not see a ton of Wallace or Cross or Hawkins because I don't really feel like this coaching staff felt like they needed to. This was running back. Running back was like the one position that was unscathed by injury in the spring. So I don't think they wanted to tempt fate a little bit. And again, the capabilities there of those 3 guys. They were, the beginning of this season, we saw Zach Wallace kind of right out of the gate be that bruising back, that guy that you're going to put in the power run game when it's a short yardage situation. That's who's going to be out on the field. Jaquez Cross is more of the shifty back. So he's going to be able to juke somebody out of their shoes. He's going to be able to turn when he sees that little opening and be able to make a play happen. And then Cedric Hawkins is just the straight up speed dude. If he gets past you, you're not going to catch him. So it's really cool that all 3 of those guys have just a little bit different of a skill set that depending on the situation, it's going to depend on who's out there and who gets to shine. We saw Hawkins a little bit more towards the end of the season. He didn't get a ton of reps as a true freshman, and also because he had those 2 great guys ahead of him. But I'm really intrigued to see how that 3-headed monster at running back shapes up this fall carries wise.
And I know you didn't get to see them, but last year you kind of had a 50-50 split between Cross and Wallace. Is that something that maybe it's a 30-30-30 split?
Maybe 40-40-20, because I do think Hawkins this year will be more involved in the offense. I really do. In addition to, Hawkins is a good pass catcher, as is Cross. Wallace can as well, but I feel like that's maybe just a little bit more in Cross and in Hawkins's wheelhouse. So everything is going to be really, really situational. But I feel maybe 40, we'll go 40-40-20 for my prediction on kind of how those carries work out there with those 3 running backs.
And then Justice kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but Jalen Rayner had 5 less rushing attempts than their leading rusher Cross. I know sacks are included in college and rushing and whatnot, but do you expect to see the same volume that we saw in 2024, or, like with having Timmy McClain and a more capable backup there, do we continue to see that rushing, or do we see him pull him back?
I think it'll probably be about the same. I do think that overall Jalen Rayner's best strength is actually his arm, especially on the deep ball. He has a good touch on that pass specifically. But I don't think they're going to intentionally. It's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. He had good success throwing the ball and running the ball. The best play this season that he made was a running play. So you're certainly going to see him still take off with it quite a bit. But we'll just have to kind of wait and see in terms of the exact mixture there.
The passing game also brings back most of the crew from 2023. They do lose Jeff Foreman to graduation, but they bring back Corey Rucker, Courtney Jackson, Reagan Ely, Adam Jones, and others. How did the wide receiver room look in the spring?
A little bit incomplete because there was, again, a couple of injuries there. Adam Jones started out the season without really being in the mix. He was able to finish the spring in a couple of practices, but he was still in a no-contact jersey. Corey Rucker was in a no-contact jersey to start the spring. He was out. by about the midway point. The good news, by the way, with almost every single last one of these injuries I have mentioned or will mention, is that with very few exceptions, these are injuries that will not impact the fall. So, for example, Rutgers, I believe was a knee, but it was a non-surgical situation. But because of that, you're down a couple of really key contributors. I do really like the wide receiver room overall. I feel like there is upside there. Courtney Jackson is just Mr. Consistent, man. He is so steady there as a slot receiver. I feel like Corey Rucker last year, he was hurt his entire 2022 campaign when he was at South Carolina before he transferred back to Arkansas State. He was at A-State, then a year at South Carolina, then back at A-State last year. And I feel like because of that injury last year, maybe he started a little bit strong, a little bit slow, but then he was really playing well at the end of the season. I think he's going to be able to pick up there where he left off. And then you add in, Reagan Ely has got a ton of experience at this point in time. Adam Jones is going to be healthy this fall. He'll be able to contribute. You add in a guy like Reginald Harden. You've got a real speedster like Tennell Bryant, who's going to be on the two deep. And I think overall there's a lot of different kind of pieces in this room that are really complementary.
So you mentioned earlier about them bringing in Malik Hornsby via the transfer portal. And so, what we've heard so far is he's not there to play quarterback. He's there to play receiver. But what kind of role do you see him playing for the team in 2024?
Well, about that not there to play quarterback thing, he played a decent amount of quarterback this spring. And part of that was due to, the injury of Flowers. They were really limited in that room. So Hornsby was able to get some work. But the deal with Hornsby is ultimately they like him a lot. They like his playmaking ability. So they're going to try and find a lot of different ways to get the ball in his hand. Some of that is going to be as a wide receiver, line him up outside. He's got good size. He's got good speed. See what happens. But some of that, they're going to throw him in there and probably a couple of wildcat packages. He's obviously, when you've got a guy who could throw like that, that's a great trick play guy, for sure. So I don't think that at this point in time right now, I'm quite ready to put Malik Hornsby into one box. I think he's going to be a little bit of a jack of all trades, and we're going to see him make some plays in several different aspects in 24.
So last season, Corey Rucker and Courtney Jackson kind of ran this, as far as snaps, they were about the same. Mm-hmm. And receptions and yards fairly close. But there's a big disparity in number of touchdowns. Jackson had 7 compared to Rucker only had 2. For those that perhaps don't watch Arkansas State, is there something with their usage and how they're used that kind of led to that disparity, or just kind of the way it happened?
Well, I think partly, Jackson's got a tiny bit more speed. So that's probably a little bit of it, especially since Rutgers started the season a little bit slower. And again, he was really up to speed at the end of the year, but I kind of picture, Jackson is a guy a lot of times they're going to find in the middle of the field. Sometimes Rutgers is a little bit more down the sideline, so it's easier to push a guy out of bounds and things like that. And that's not concrete across the board. Each of those guys are going to make plays in different areas of the field. But I think the slow start, I think their usage explains a little bit of that disparity. I would expect Corey Rucker to lead the team in touchdowns in 2024.
Awesome.
All right. Jacksonville State also returns 2 tight ends in Miller McCrumbie and Emmanuel Stevenson. If you were to describe the tight end usage to someone who has never caught a game before, how would you describe their usage?
It's been really interesting to watch Butch Jones use his tight ends over the past 3 years when he's been at the helm. I'll be honest with you, flashing back to 2021, I honestly don't remember how much they used that position in terms of receiving. But in 2022, it was actually a tight end that led the team in receiving yards and targets, and that was Seydou Traoré. And Seydou Traoré was just, obviously, he was a great pass-catching tight end. He was kind of that prototypical, like when people say, the tight end is always open, they're talking about a guy like Seydou Traoré. When you've got those 3rd and medium situations, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, that was the go-to guy. And more often than not, he converted. And then after his really phenomenal sophomore season, he left. So you had some different guys in there last year. Emmanuel Stevenson is good at both pass catching and blocking. However, he got hurt after about game 8 or so and was not back yet for the spring. Miller McCrumbie is maybe a little bit. He's good in both aspects as well. I do think he's a good pass catching tight end, but he's still getting a little bit more experience last year. I think he's going to be able to take a big step this year going into 2024. So I think we'll see more usage in the receiving game of the tight ends than last year, but not as much as 2022. And they'll do that. Butch Jones likes his 2 tight end sets to the goal line and things like that. So you'll see some of that, but how much the tight end is used in the receiving game will be totally dependent upon personnel.
So the offensive line didn't fare too bad in terms of returning production. I'm not sure about injuries, but they did have quite a bit returning this year. They did lose starting right guard Jalen Cunningham and Hamilton Hall to graduation. Well, I take that back. We know that they suffered a pretty big loss in all Sun Belt center Jacob Bayer to a torn ACL in spring practice, which is certainly a bummer. How will this team look to kind of fill that void? And how did that group look, I guess, in the spring?
Yeah, it was another group where it was kind of hard to wrap your head around what this group is going to look like in the fall, because you had, of course, the big injury was to Jacob Bayer starting at center, who is just so good. You mentioned the All Sun Belt accolades. You go through and you look through the Pro Football Focus grades and the rankings there, and he was evaluated as the second best center in FBS last year. Just so good. So obviously that's a blow, and that's a blow from a football perspective. That's a blow. He was considered an incredibly important team leader, and obviously he's still around, but it's not quite the same when a guy's not able to get on the field with you. In addition to that, at the last week or so of spring camp, and actually a little bit before that because he was a little bit hobbled, but left tackle Noah Smith broke his ankle. So you were without for the spring game and for the final week of camp, both the projected starting center and the projected starting left tackle. Smith will be back in time for fall camp, and they are already kind of freaking out in a positive way about the speed of Bayer's recovery. But the world's fastest ACL recovery for a football player is you're still looking at like 6 months, and the injury was right around April 1st. So if you're targeting October or November, obviously you still got a backup plan. They really liked the way that Mason Myers progressed this spring. He's a redshirt freshman, or will be heading into his redshirt freshman season. And he was a guy that didn't play center in high school, was learning about the position. And when Bayer first went down, it was a little scary. There were some not great snaps from the guys that were backing him up. But as everybody got a little bit more accustomed to those roles, we saw some progress. And by the end of spring, they were really, really pleased with Myers' growth. And I guess that's the plan now in the fall. I think there are some other options. McKeelan Thomas is a very versatile offensive lineman. I would expect to see him at right tackle. But when there was a emergency with Jacob Bayer in game 12 last year, ahead of the Marshall game, like 2 hours before the game, they found out he was not going to be available. It was McKeelan Thomas that stepped in and played at center. So there could be some shifting there on the line. Although right now I think it might be Myers for game 1. We'll see.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
I think on offense, one of the things there is that there's so many knowns. If you go back and look at returning production, and I use Bill Connolly's rankings at ESPN because he's been covering college football forever and has his own metrics for that. I think back in February, A-State was 8th overall in returning offensive production. So you know what the running back room is capable of. You've seen these receivers. You've seen Jalen Rayner. But I'm going to go with incoming transfer receiver Reginald Harden. He is actually a D2 transfer. I think it was Benedict College is where he was at last year. And the thing that immediately jumps out at you about Harden is his size. He's 6'5". And the past couple of years, I wouldn't necessarily say that A-State has been really undersized at wide receiver, but they haven't had a guy like that. And when you've got a guy, especially in the Sun Belt where corners are still around that 5'11", 6 foot even range, when you've got a guy that's 6'5", I mean, he's on a sideline, he's in the corner of the end zone, he's just going to be able to reach up and get it. I think the thing that he'll have to adjust to the most is the different level of physicality going from Division II to Division I. But if he is able to make that adjustment, I think he can be a huge asset to that wide receiving room. So that's kind of what I'm trying to speak into existence. We know so much about that offensive talent. I want to see what Reginald Harden can do.
Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball and talk about the guys up front along that defensive line. They lose Thurman Gaithers to graduation, Kieran Crawford over to Auburn, but they do return Nate Marty, who led them in sacks last year, as well as Tim Hardiman and others. How did the defensive line look in the spring?
It looked different than it's going to look this fall. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Kieran Crawford went through probably about 2/3 maybe of spring camp before he transferred. Same thing for Denard Flowers, who was getting a lot of snaps at defensive end. Nate Marty did not participate in spring at defensive tackle because he was injured. Also, another key contributor at defensive end, Ethan Hassler, did not participate this spring because he was injured. So I don't know what this defensive line is going to look like. I think when it got time for the spring game, looking at the guys who were out there, I think you had Brian Whitehead, a defensive end transfer from Liberty that they're really excited about. They liked what he was doing by the end of spring camp. Ethan Hassler is going to be back this fall, and he was a big contributor when he was healthy. He started the season starting at defensive end. Got beat up. That's when Gathers came in. He played incredibly well. So Hassler backed him up towards the end of the season. And then at the interior, I'm excited to see what Tim Hardiman's going to do. A lot of the guys at the interior are new in terms of you've got Micaiah Overton, you've got Lucas Banks. Blaine Tola is a guy who came in as a defensive end, but late at the end of last year, they moved him to the interior. So he's still getting comfortable and settled in there. And there's a lot of new names and numbers and faces on this defensive line right now.
Is there anyone that, with the graduation of Thurman, anyone that can kind of help Crawford, or Thurman and Crawford? I guess you lost both of those guys. Mm-hmm. They were the top guys in terms of generating pressure on the quarterback. Who would you kind of expect other than Nate Marty? Who did you kind of expect to kind of fill that void there in terms of getting to the quarterback?
Well, I do think a healthy Ethan Hassler is going to be able to help fill that role. And then just looking at some of the new guys, again, still learning about Brian Whitehead, but I know that's one of the reasons they brought him in there at the end to help with the pass rush, and they actually brought in several guys at defensive end, Noah Collins, Drew Collins as well. But I'm hoping that, Brian Whitehead and Ethan Hassler can be the guys that help pick up statistically with those departures.
The linebacking group brings back its leading tackler from 2023 in Charlo Willikis. However, they did take some hits, losing Malik Straker to graduation and breakout freshman Javonte Mackey to Memphis. How did that linebacking group look in the spring?
I think this is going to be a solid group. Willikis is a team leader. He is a quarterback of the defense. This is his third year at Arkansas State. He's settled. He's comfortable. He knows what the expectations are. He knows how to communicate with his teammates and lead the defense. One guy that I'm really excited to hopefully see coming up this fall is Dane Motley. Dane Motley has actually been in the program since 2019. He signed with Arkansas State under previous head coach Blake Anderson. He's had some opportunities, and then he's played some. He's been a bench guy some, but he got an opportunity in the bowl game with the departure of Javonte Mackey. I feel like he played well. He was the number one guy at the will spot for the entire spring, and I feel like he was solid there. So I like the storyline with Dane Motley. You're the longest tenured guy in the program. You're playing in your 6th season, and you got a chance to go out on top and just seize the opportunity after a departure there. So I like Motley. Willikis is solid. I'm really interested to see what happens at that star position, that hybrid linebacker safety spot, because while Jordan Sample was the guy for most of the spring, there could be a position change in play there with really talented safety Justin Parks moving over and playing some of that star position. He was out for the spring, so we didn't get to see it in action.
So the defensive backfield returns another top tackler and safety, Trevion Thomas, as well as Justin Parks and Justin Hodges. However, they lost some great cornerbacks to graduation, Sammy Johnson and Leon Jones. How did the defensive backfield look in the spring?
Injured. Again, and I'm sorry to keep throwing that out there. And we did get to see at the very beginning of camp, and we'll start with the corners. We did get to see Justin Hodges, who started last year, play a little bit. We got to see Jordan Mahoney play a little bit at the beginning of spring. And Mahoney is a UMass transfer that A-State actually faced in week 3 or 4, somewhere in there at the beginning of the season. But they liked him, scooped him up from the Minutemen, and unfortunately, both Hodges and Mahoney, probably the back half of spring, weren't in action very much at all. Nothing significant. I think some hammies. If it's the regular season, those guys probably play, but it's spring, so they didn't. So we didn't get to see a whole lot of those guys in action in terms of the live work. Now, we did get to see a little bit of depth. Dante Joyner is a guy that they liked a whole lot last year, played a little bit as a true freshman. So he'll be back in the mix there as well. And Coastal Carolina transfer Manny Stokes was out there quite a bit this spring at safety. Again, Justin Parks missed the entire spring. And I don't know how much he'll be at safety because Coach Jones also really likes him at star, but it doesn't sound like there's anything necessarily 100% decided with Parks' future, because it depends on the guys around him. You know, you don't want to throw him into the mix at star and then significantly weaken your secondary. So it just kind of depends on that group. At safety with Parks out, we saw James Reed III step up this spring. I feel like he played well. You had Brandon Grill, apologies, that was in the mix as well. Websley Etienne, who has been a significant contributor on special teams, will probably take some more reps at safety this year. I think he's ready for a step up there. So I think you got a little bit of depth there, but Sammy Johnson was like the man. He had been at A-State for a minute. And so when you lose a senior like that, who is a leader and who is very good at what he does, it is a bit of a question who's going to step up and kind of lead that unit.
All right. If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who do you got there?
I think I'm trying to manifest it. I really, I like the storyline with Dane Motley being a guy who originally signed with Arkansas State. I'm pretty sure in 2019, because I'm pretty sure it was like the regular redshirt year and then the COVID year. And then, so he's going to have another year. And obviously there's a real opportunity here for him to make the most of it and perhaps be the starter there at that will spot and go out with a lot of playing time and being a contributor to a team that I think is going to be able to take a big step this year. There are definitely more questions on defense than offense with all of the new faces there. But again, he's got a lot of experience. If 6-year senior, he's got the capabilities, he's got the knowledge to be a team leader. So I want it to be Dane Motley.
This might be a hard question given all the injuries in the spring, but now that spring practice is over, was there a position group or groups that you feel is the most concerning?
I think I just have so many questions with the defensive line. And part of that is due to depth. It was a unit that got a little bit injured last year. And so depth was a little bit of an issue, especially in the interior. That's also been a spot where it has been very, very hard to acquire talent in the portal because the interior guys are getting insane NIL money. So it's not like there's just a whole lot of interior defensive linemen just out there hanging out that any school can go out and get. And then you add into the fact with some of the spring departures at defensive end and some of the graduation there. And I just don't know. There's potential for that unit to be great. But right now, I just don't know what it's going to look like this fall. And when you don't know, you're always a little bit concerned.
Sure.
And even with D tackles, it just seemed like what I would call run of the mill D tackles would put their names in the portal because one guy kind of set the market and wow, I could get a lot of money if I put my name out here and see what happens. It was definitely an interesting transfer portal season in terms of defensive tackles.
Yeah, and there's just, again, that's you just can't have too many linemen. You can't. You're only limited by scholarships, because of course you can't have like 40 offensive linemen and 40 defensive linemen, but that's always a position where coaches are going to want more and more and more depth. So what these coaches are doing is, in a lot of cases, they're going and they're rating the group of 5 to get that guy who might not come in and start, but is going to get a check for $50,000, $75,000 to be the number 2 guy on the depth chart. And that's hard to compete with financially.
Is there anything in particular you think the coaches might be looking at currently in the transfer portals position wise?
I think they're close to done. And I think a lot of the work that they're doing right now in recruiting is starting on the 25 class. Since they went out and they actually oversigned a little bit back in December because they knew there were going to be some departures coming. So they brought in a lot of players in December, signed some more guys in February as well. And then, post spring, the coaches have brought in terms of additions over the past few weeks. There's been a linebacker, quarterback, wide receiver, cornerback, defensive end, and a punter kicker that have all been late additions as well. So I'm not really sure what else they might be looking for. I mean, if you have a defensive tackle fall in your lap, you say yes. If you have an offensive lineman that's just like, coach, I'd love to come to Arkansas State. Just give me some money for cheeseburgers, whatever. I don't know. If you got an opportunity to add, and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, and it's the positions where people are always looking to add, you take it. But I don't necessarily think right now there is a spot that they're looking at and they're thinking, oh, if we don't go out and get something else here, we're doomed.
All right. Well, what would you say the main strength of this team is?
I think the offense, just you look at the returning production, you look at, a quarterback who's going to be in his second year and I think is poised to take a big step. You look at the experience at wide receiver. Courtney Jackson is going to be a senior. Corey Rucker is going to be a 5th-year junior. I think you've got you're just not going to be really counting on many young guys. If there's a young guy that can step up there, awesome. But that's going to be an experienced unit. There's also complete continuity there on the coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball. The entire coaching staff on that side returns, and really there's a fair amount of continuity overall with just one departure, and that was at linebacker, the linebackers coach. But the experience, the continuity, the possibilities about some of these younger players taking a big step this year, it's really easy to talk yourself into this being hands down the best year offensively in the Butch Jones era.
You talked about it a little bit in regards to the transfer portal, and the NIL. But when it comes to recruitment of new players and retention of the existing players, how has NIL kind of transformed, NIL and the portal transformed the way Arkansas State does things?
I mean, everybody's kind of dealing with it, right? I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but pretty much everywhere that it's not just a conversation anymore when you're bringing in a portal player between the coaching staff and the player. It's a conversation between the coaching staff and the collective and the player and everybody else involved. It's just a different world. I don't have necessarily specifics and huge amount of insight on what goes on behind the scenes with NIL and Arkansas State. And I don't know how those conversations go now at the end of the season, when not only are you trying to recruit new guys for next year, but you have to now go through a complete and total recruiting pitch for your old guys too. All you can do is adapt. I mean, that's college athletics. You adapt or die. I feel like this staff did do a fairly good job of being able to hold on to a lot of key talent. There were some departures that hurt for sure. And defensive end is a spot where I'm going to have some questions. You lose a key linebacker as well, but this team returns all of its offensive talent, returns some good guys on defense as well. So I think this coaching staff has adapted as best you can.
Is the collective there? Is that something like, is it pretty well established, or did it just recently start, or?
It has been up and running. I don't know how long, a couple of years, I guess at this point. I do feel like the guys that are kind of helming that are doing a great job. It helps when you have a guy like Demario Davis, who's now with the Saints, that is, one of your board members for your collective. I think if Demario Davis calls, you're going to listen. I would listen personally, you know. So, and I don't know how much he's involved in terms of the day to day. Like if he's, I don't think he's calling up specific players and being that guy, but he is involved behind the scenes. The board of directors there is doing a good job. The leadership, I feel, of the collective is doing a good job. And I do know whenever they put out fundraising initiatives, they always seem to meet those. So of course they'll put out something saying, hey, you know, we've got a donor that's going to match $150,000 if you guys can find a way to donate $150,000 by the end of the month. And that those initiatives have always worked, have always been met. So it seems like it's good, but no collectives are necessarily putting out their bank statements on social.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know how much the Raging Cajun collective has. I have no idea what the numbers look like at Georgia Southern or App State and your league members or your regional peers. I don't know what they're doing. So it seems like it's good, but nobody knows until you get outbid, right? So
yeah, if I was to take a guess on the Sun Belt, and this is just a pure guess, I would think most of them are around $1 million to $500K range on an annual basis. That's sure. It's kind of what I've gathered. But then you get Memphis that just got the $5 million donation every year from FedEx. So yeah,
it helps to have a huge a huge company like that in your backyard that's willing to support your program.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it seems more and more that the demands of the head coach are really turning into more of like a general manager type role, because you got to recruit the incoming freshmen, recruit your players, recruit transfer portal guys, fundraising, and they're getting away from the X's and O's role. Do you see that happening at Arkansas State, or have you seen coaching staffs get a little bit bigger to kind of help out coach?
I do feel like Coach Jones is still very hands-on, and he wants to be in it, and he wants to know and be involved, and whether that's, on the field, the X's and O's, whatever. I don't really see him as like necessarily a kind of stand back and be a CEO kind of guy. I do feel like at Arkansas State, just like so many other places, the staff has continued to grow. You still have, just your 10 assistants, but it seems like every few weeks I'll see somebody else on Twitter X, and it's, they've got a different label for A-State football. And you're like, I didn't know this position existed. It used to be fairly simple. You had like an offensive GA and you had a defensive GA. And then now there's quality control, and now there's like quality control special teams and quality control defensive line. And then there is the director of personnel, the director of scouting, the director of recruiting, the director of portaling. I don't know. Like it's just something different all the time. And so it used to just be the assistants, a couple GAs, you were good. And now every coaching staff in the country has the 10 assistants and then 30 other dudes that are doing stuff.
So the 2024 season's over. The dust has settled. You're looking back upon it. What has to happen for you to say, hey, this season was a success?
This team has to be in contention for a Sun Belt West title, period. I feel like, A-State is heading into year 4 of the Butch Jones era. Year 1 and 2 were tough. And obviously A-State took a big step last year, getting to that 6th win, making it to a bowl game. Although eventually, we'll not talk about how that game ended and just move on. But it ended with a 6-7 record, but they took the step, got back to the bowl trip, which is what they needed to do. The next step, of course, is to contend for a conference title. I feel like there's been a little bit of shakeup in the West. Troy was rolling right along, but John Summerall departed. South Alabama had some great moments under Kane Womack, and he departed. JMU lost their head coach, and they were in the thick of it in the Sun Belt race all year, although there was the weird NCAA stuff that kept them out of the conference. I feel like the Sun Belt, there's some good opportunities for somebody else to step up and emerge. And I think it's going to be a really fun conversation when we get into August to see how the West is expected to play out this year. Louisiana returns a ton of dudes, and they're going to be entering their third year under head coach Michael Decimo. So they've gotten adjusted to his expectations and his leadership. Texas State, of course, brought in a new head coach last year in G.J. Kinney. He's brought in a ton of transfers. Worked out well for him last year, but they need to shore up that defense. He's known as an offensive guy, but they give up a lot of points. A-State put 73 on him. So what do they look like? Are they able to shore up that side of the ball? How much does Troy fall off with a new head coach, or do they at all? What does Southern Miss look like with Will Hall probably entering the year on the hot seat? There's just a ton of questions in the West, but I feel like A-State should be in the conversation to win the division at the end of the year. I'm personally going to be disappointed.
Kara, is there anything else you want to share or think that we should know about the 2024 Arkansas State Red Wolves football team?
If you watch them on TV, you're going to see water features. I think that's really important.
They're really cool. They are, and we were talking before. I tried to find a video. As a matter of fact, the video that I did find is pre-stadium renovation.
Yeah.
But then I think when you saw the pyro, you saw them coming out. If you look really quick, you see the water shooting up there. But yeah, it's definitely a cool feature they have.
Yeah, the video at which I loved the video at the beginning because you guys showed not just scenes from 2023 Arkansas State football, but I saw like the Bluff City Miracle back in oh gosh, I can't remember what that was. I went blank now. But in the late 2000 decade, and then you guys had some cooler. I saw like get tackled by Demario Davis in that video, which was really cool. And of course, he hasn't been at A-State in over a dozen years as he graduated and went to the NFL. But the stadium looks a little bit different than it does at the very beginning of that video. And I know a lot of people are excited about EA Sports College Football 25 when that comes out. If you play at Centennial Bank Stadium, you'll see the water features go off when the players score, and it's pretty cool.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to that. So thank you again, Kara, for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Guys, thank you so much for the invite. I had a great time talking a little football. It feels like we're right in the awful time of the off season. It's behind us a couple months. Everybody's done with spring, and it's still well over 100 days until we get to the fall.
I think it's right around 100. It might be 99 today. I'm not sure. It's right around there.
I think 100 days out from A-State football is Thursday, May the 23rd or 24th, somewhere in that neighborhood. Of course, they're close. They're week 0 games, so so it's a little bit earlier for some of those teams. But it's good to be able to talk about it, even though it's a little bit further away than I would like.
Absolutely. Well, hey, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you are listening to us in podcast form, please leave a rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until next time, we are the G5 Hive.